Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven on WNHH New Haven's home for community radio. I'm Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make New Haven tick. Well, you know this show ticks when this gentleman comes in the studio because he always keeps it lively. We hear about it for weeks to come. We're going to be speaking today about some of the policing issues that are in the news with WNHH FM's criminal justice expert, policing expert, John Velleca, former assistant police chief, chief police at other places, and now professor of criminal justice at Albertus Macundas College, and the sergeant at arms, correct?
Yep.
Of the Connecticut State Senate. John, welcome.
Good to be back.
How's that going at the Senate? Like, what's that like?
What are you doing up there? I haven't really been up there.
Oh, I thought you were the sergeant at arms.
I am, yeah, but they, they'll call me up there, and they haven't. They've been just doing their own thing.
Is that because it's only when there's a full session that you're there, as opposed to committees?
I think the staff. The chief of staff up there will decide when they need the sergeant at arms, when they don't. So yes, usually if it's an all-day long kind of thing, and they expect crowds, something like that's important to the debating.
Like a big hearing, yeah.
Yeah, if it's something they just go in quick for, then no, they don't usually call everybody.
What about the end of the session when they're doing those all-nighters?
Yeah.
And everyone, are you there then?
Yeah, usually, yeah.
That must be fun.
Oh yeah, it's great.
Now,
Yeah.
so when you're a cop, you'd have to watch a crowd to see who's up to what in the corners. When you're there as sergeant at arms, do you look at who's having a conversation with another lawmaker or a lobbyist in the corner to see what bill's going to make it before the midnight deadline?
No, not so much that, but more of the galleries and stuff like that, and who comes in and out of the chamber. And
So you're
stuff
really
like that, yeah.
focused on any threats.
Focus on any threats to the lawmakers and anybody who the lobbyists can only come to a certain point, and then they have to back off to make sure nobody's slipped in to try and get the extra word.
What if they know the sergeant at arms?
That won't help. The sergeant
Not
at
gonna
arms.
help?
No,
So John Velleca, you're not getting in there.
The
with
sergeant at arms will be
beverage industry to
relieved
get that
very
bill,
quickly
to get rid of that bottle deposit law. Is it fun?
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes to hear the debates are pretty interesting. Yeah, sure.
So how many years you done that?
Since 2017. So
Wow.
7 years. Yeah.
So 6 years.
Yeah, 6 years.
Pandemic, you had a little break, right?
Yeah.
What have you learned doing it?
I've
First of all,
learned-
have you ever had an incident? Have you ever had an incident where you had to deal with someone rambunctious?
No, because if we identify something like that, we usually have the Capitol Police to take care of that. So there have been times, sure, there have been people protesting about certain things.
And what do you have the police do?
Well, the police will usually try and respect their right to assemble and protest, and then escort them off the building, and then out of the building rather, if they get disorderly. But usually the police are pretty good, and I know from talking to Casanova, they basically just are a presence, make sure everything is okay.
You're talking about Luke Casanova, another former assistant police chief who's the head of the Capitol Police.
Yeah, as a
So you
chief up
guys
there.
work together again.
Yeah, doing a great job. Louis is up there, changed a lot of different things, and people come up there and they enjoy their right to assemble and to protest. And usually,
other
there's no
states
incidents,
it's different. They've had problems in other states, Michigan,
Right?
places
No,
like that,
not
where
so
people-
much here. Not so much here. I mean, they have their incidents here and there, but not huge.
Well, John Velleca, mass shootings are always in the news.
Yeah.
We get kind of a nerd to them, like Allen, Texas, where the guy just killed the 10 people, the white supremacist guy.
Yeah.
How do you think about it as a law enforcement person, as a criminal justice professor? What do you think when you see these in the news? Are we seeing more of them? Are we paying more attention to them? Does it say something about the state of violence in America?
Well, I think this year we've been seeing more of them, right? And I think people are attributing that to a few different things, the pandemic and anxiety and stress and stuff like that.
How many years are we going to keep blaming the pandemic for everybody going?
I don't know. I don't really agree with that. To be honest with you,
I mean, it was a factor. Yeah.
Right. I'm not sure if I would agree with that, but I think you're right. I think there's that effect where everything is now being attributed to the pandemic. I believe wholeheartedly that these weapons like AR-15s that can do a lot of killing very quickly are a huge problem. They're not. So let's back up. We tend to be going down the same road as we went down with drugs. For years, we tried to prevent drugs and stop drugs. It didn't work. We had to realize that this, in our country, we have to live among drugs, figure out a way to live among drugs. Now, we have to do the same thing with guns and gun violence, because we're not eradicating guns. We're not eradicating gun violence. But how can we get that to a situation where we can at least, combat it to a certain degree? And if you're asking me, you give people these weapons that are so efficient at killing and so efficient at killing quickly. That's a recipe for disaster. I mean,
can we stop them from having them?
I think we should. Yeah, I absolutely believe we should.
And even the Texas Legislative Committee yesterday reversed and said they want to make you be 21 before you can mow down everyone in 2 seconds at a mall rather than 18.
Right. Yeah. I don't think we should have them to begin with. And I know that is a hot button topic.
What's the defense they get is once you start with that, you go for others? Because, like, this isn't hunting. This isn't self-protection. This is about going and killing so many people so fast.
That's
15
right.
people in 2 seconds.
So, these things happen. They say, by the time the first shot goes off and the call the police made is between 3 and 5 minutes. Then it takes the police another 2 to 3 or 4 minutes to get there, right? And then within 5 minutes, the thing is over, right? So, in a few minutes, the body count with an AR-15 or something, a weapon like that can be much, much higher than it would be with a handgun. Now, we're still losing people, of course. It's not an ideal situation. However, we're losing 4 or 5 as compared to 25, 30. I mean, we have to look at that. At some point, we have to look at that.
So it's not the root of the problem, but it's one of the cases where
we have to give the police a chance to get there and at least try and stop the carnage, right? But, I was reading the other day, I think it was, you have 400 and some odd of these shootings, and that was at least the sample they took. And, more than 60%, the police had no bearing on the outcome. Long story short.
So the NRA says let everyone have their AR-15s, but have trained people who aren't police to shoot them first.
Yeah, I mean,
that's like the law of the jungle.
That's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. But listen, I'm not a,
Why is it ridiculous?
Because
by the way, I do agree with you. I'm just curious.
If you have a gun problem, you're going to inject more guns into this situation. That doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, that's my personal opinion. I don't think you fix a gun problem by arming everybody. What is that old saying? The only thing that stops a bad guy with a gun is a good guy with a gun. Well, there is a little bit of truth to that, but let's think about us as police officers. We practice and we train and we live with a gun on our hip for years, right? 20 years, I went to work with a gun on my hip the way you go to work with your briefcase, right?
Notebook,
okay?
Briefcase.
Right, no briefcase. But we, putting in these tense situations, we still hit people, I think it was 7 or 8% of the time. Now you're going to put guns, very efficient killing guns, in the hands of people who are not going to train, and you're going to expect them to use this gun in a high-stress situation to save the day. That's not going to happen. The chances are better that they're going to inadvertently, accidentally hit more victims. You know what I mean? I don't agree with that, to be honest.
So, obviously, John, you and I come from the same place in this. I'm trying to play devil's advocate just to really address the issue. So they say, you start out by saying something I've come to realize, too, which is that we're not going to get rid of guns in a way we'd like to.
Right.
We're not going to. So if it's like drugs, it's going to be everywhere. So that's why they say we should have teams who go out and do harm reduction and give people clean needles. Similarly, that is the argument for training people who aren't cops, since the cops can't get there fast enough. It does feel like we're just racing to the bottom where everyone's shooting each other all the time, and there are those unplanned discharges of weapons that still kill people and there's suicide. But I do think this argument is getting at a new phase where there's a fatalism about we can't even ban AR-15s that have no purpose except to kill a lot of people really fast. They're not self-defense weapons.
No.
So how are we going to get to the point where, can we really get to the point where,
I don't know.
We mentioned about Timothy McVeigh, he was stopped after he did his mass killing because he had a pistol on him and a carry, and that he would be let go because the law has changed in that state.
Yeah, so no, I don't know if we ever, and I don't have the answers to get there, but I do know this with like everything else we talk about in public safety. We have to get to a point where we realize this is a team effort here. We can't be Republicans and Democrats. It can't be black and white. It can't be men and women. It's got to be all of us together on the same page, working towards a common goal, and that counts for everything across the board, whether that's gun control or drugs or police-community relationships. It's everything. We can't be splintered, because when we're splintered, we're weak, and then we're never going to get anything done.
All right, that's John Velleca preaching on Dateline New Haven and WNHH FM.
Exactly,
Amen. Amen. 103.5 live stream to newhavenpin.org. We're talking with the WNHH resident criminal justice expert. So we've had 11 homicides this year in New Haven, which is a high rate. You've been there.
Average.
You and I. It's not average. That's 33 for the year. That's 30. That's the high
it'll slow down and then it'll pick up. I project probably 20, 25 for this year.
Well, you and I talk about how it's a small relative number, so just a few
Yeah.
changes. That you were acting chief, I believe, and we had one of our big 30-something years of homicides. And there was a case where it's kind of a random thing. Some guy was upset in a workplace in a laundry and killed 3 people. I mean, that wasn't meaning there's more street violence. So how do we think about the numbers, and what do we think about the state? Because people are very upset about gun violence and what it means in the city. At the same time, when there's not this panic we have at certain times when there are these beefs and we're losing a lot of people who are like 16 years old getting shot and then tit for tat. It seems to me a lot of these recent ones have been like very individualized arguments.
Right.
There was one in a car dealership with people who don't live in New Haven. They were arguing over the business and the money, and they pulled out a gun, and the shooter stayed on scene because he regretted it.
Yeah.
And there was another one like that where the guy stayed on scene because when there was an argument about a girlfriend and the baby daddy, and in Fairhaven, he stayed on scene. He called 911. I know that's not all of them, but it kind of goes back to our first point, John. Have we reached a new level where people are going to die more than they did everywhere in America? New Haven, no different, because guns have gotten even more plentiful, more efficient, and they're being used more to settle arguments. Is that true, or is that just an impression?
No, I agree. I think what we're seeing now is much more dangerous than what we saw years ago. Years ago, there was gun violence as the result of gang culture, right? Now there seems to just be gun culture. You know, when guns are being used to settle disputes that were otherwise arguments or maybe even fistfights. But, you know, a lot of times guns are being used to settle these things, and it's almost, we've been desensitized to the use of a firearm because, and I think the media plays into that. You know, a lot of this is driven. Listen, we talk about trauma, right? But you don't have to be shot or see somebody get shot to do a trauma, to be dealing with trauma from gun violence, rather. You could see it on Facebook or on Instagram or on CNN or on, you know, even if you have nothing to do with it firsthand, secondarily, you're still experiencing this trauma. And the more you get beat down with that, the more it becomes part of our culture, right? And now we've gotten to a point where guns are part of our culture, and the use of guns has almost been normalized, unfortunately. And I think that it's more dangerous what we're seeing now than what we saw in the 80s.
Now, we haven't seen that many mass shootings. The definition of mass shooting varies, a number of victims. I think they consider the strip club shooting I had, I think around, was it 2016, 2015 in New Haven on Hamilton Street. I think several people died and the whole room was shot up. We don't have too many of those.
Right. We had, Gun Violence Archive says it's 4 or more excluding the shooter. So you're figuring 4
Dead?
people, 4 fatalities,
So
excluding the shooter. No, we've had 3. Have we ever had 4? I can't remember any 4. Maybe. I don't remember it offhand, though, to be honest with you.
What does that tell us about what's happening here for some places? Is some of this copycat? Is some of this social media? Is some of this the right-wing? Well, they says at least 60% of this are right-wing extremists. What, including the one it looks like in Allen, Texas.
Yeah,
What role is that playing? What does that mean for us in New Haven?
Well, you know, I think our whole country is there's this ridiculous divide, right? And people are very upset and aggravated and frustrated, and people take it out by using guns. What does it mean for us in New Haven? I'm not sure, to be honest with you. We're not real divided here in New Haven. We seem to be all, we're pretty much all Democrats, right? You know.
And the ADL claims that even though a Bernie Sanders supporter shot Steve Scalise, the congressman, years back in a softball game, they say every politically motivated mass shooting has been a right-wing racist extremist, white supremacist, however you want to call it. Yeah,
that's that's where guns are the most prevalent. You know what I mean? I would say, you know, we don't see a lot of people like ourselves who are big on guns, but on the other side of it, you know, guns is a staple in the conservative aspect. You know.
So now there have been 9 arrests so far this year for homicides.
Yeah.
They're solving a lot of cases, and I always try to be wary of how I report that, because one year when we were solving pretty much none of them, when we had Chief Dominguez in charge, part of it seemed like, Waterbury was solving all of them. One of our readers said, well, they're really solving them? I'm kind of nervous. And I think the reader was completely right. Because sometimes if it's not a strong case, you remember this from your run-ins with state attorney, that you really have to have the goods. Yeah. So I'm trying to look at these 9. I've read the arrest warrants, and I don't have your expertise, because you've written these warrant affidavits. You've investigated and solved these cases. It sounds to me like they are solving the cases. When I look at the evidence, I'm not just seeing one eyewitness. In these cases, I'm seeing, 2 of them, the guy called. But in a couple of these cases, they have a combination of
Yeah.
video that actually shows the incident,
Yeah.
or shows someone around the incident, a whole bunch of those.
Yeah.
And then they follow up with people who they have an eyewitness or two, but that's a little tricky.
Yeah.
And then they do have physical evidence that they get as a result of that. In one case, they found through the video somebody who then led them to someone who got the clothing. They had a search warrant
Right.
to get clothing out of the apartment, which was the same clothing that was worn on the camera. So these seem like pretty solid. And I also have the impression the state's attorney does demand, they're not just going to sign everything that's brought. They want to be convinced there's a strong enough case. Am I right?
Yeah. Well, in this day and age, and especially with the history of eyewitness identifications, because when I was a detective, certainly back in in the early 2000s, and when I was a detective supervisor, most of the cases were made on eyewitness identifications. Now you can't really make a case on that anymore because they've been proven to be faulty. So you have to
numero dos.
Numero dos, right? There
was a detective who would, like, he's Spanish, that would tell people which one to point at.
Right. Well,
and a photo array.
Well, that's a whole nother topic. We can get into that. But yes, and they could be, the identification process could certainly be faulty. The picture, everything. But so you can't do that anymore. You can't make those cases solely on a witness identification. So you need additional supporting evidence. And I think the guys now are doing, guys and girls are doing a great job putting that stuff all together. Now, granted, they have more tools than we had, right? And that'll segue into our next conversation. But I do think they're putting together strong cases, and I do think they're working hard. And I got to be honest with you, I'm a little bit surprised because they are so understaffed. And I will tell you, no matter what you have at your disposal, there's nothing more than manpower. You need detectives to work the case,
and
no matter what.
You need them also to be led well or not? Because I have
a feeling
that Chief Etienne is doing a pretty good job.
I think Bertram is doing a good job, and I think Bertram, I was just thinking about this the other day. There's a lot of things that he's doing better at his age and his tenure that I wish I did when I was.
Give me an example.
I think he's savvy, right? I think he knows when to step back instead of being like myself, kind of like a bull in the china shop at all times.
Meaning when you're questioning people, or giving them a chance to talk?
Meaning when, hypothetically, let's say you don't get your way with the state's attorney's office, or you can't get all the resources you need. Instead of marching down to the chief, where I would say I need this, that. Bert learned he's doing without, and then he'll get that stuff. It seems like he'll get that stuff later. I think that he's. I like the fact that you don't see him much, right? And that's kind of the way I was brought up. You don't see the head of the detective division very much, right? I think he's got it. I think he's wise beyond his years, so to speak. You know what I mean? I think he's got that job down pat. I think he's doing a good job.
Yeah, and I mean, the detectives, like, it's hard for me to judge from the outside, but I've been impressed, and I'm glad.
Yeah, he's a smart guy.
And of course, the other danger talking about celebrating the arrest is, of course, you don't want them to happen in the first place.
Right.
But people do want justice. So there's this whole ritual now, John, and you're familiar with it, but it's become for every case now. When they make a homicide arrest, they bring in the family, who thanks the police. Their grief is on display. I like it, but I'm not sure what to make of it.
I'm not a fan of that. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not a fan of that. I don't think that should be used as a political photo op, and that's all I see those as, right?
But they would say that we're humanizing
no, that's a bunch of shit.
The family, and showing that we care about them too, and they get justice.
Listen, you care about what I was always taught to do, and what I always did. Bring the family into your office, speak with them, sit down with them, let them stay as long as you want to stay. Ask them what they need. If they need something, you provide it for them. Whatever resources they need to get themselves back on track. Hook them up with the victim's advocate, the state victim's advocate. But this is a family that's been through so much trauma. There's no need to parade them in front of the camera, too. That's my personal opinion.
Don't they ask them? Because some don't come. What if they agree?
Well, if they agree, okay. So you have the detective division who just worked very hard on your loved one's case, and they've been successful. How many people are going to tell those people, no, I'm not going to come down? They're going to come down, even though they don't want to come down, or they may not want to come down, I should say.
What I often see is a lot of people don't want to talk, but there's usually someone, sometimes an immediate family member, sometimes an uncle or an aunt or a friend, who does want to go and make a statement about who the victim was and thank the police. And it usually gets, I don't know how effective it's going to be. I hope it is, but the same line. You could almost write the same line every time about we got to stop the shooting. When's it going to stop? I've been to too many of these.
I don't see it. I think that is. I just don't like it. Put it that way. I just don't think that the family that's going through what they've gone. Any of these families have lost a loved one. They don't need to be put out there on the front page of the paper and have the world know their business. They
TV,
simply don't. Yeah. I just
So,
don't.
I mean,
agree
I
with
like it as a reporter because I like to see who the humans are, and I like to ask them about the person so we can make the victim a little more human.
that. Right.
I feel like that serves that purpose. But I always wonder, so whose political purpose does it serve?
Which was the mayor. He gets to get out in front. I mean, when was the last time you seen him? He wasn't there. He's there all the time, and he serves him. He gets out in front of it, and he talks about what the police department is doing. It's a way for him to put a Band-Aid on him decimating the police department. They're like, look, okay, the cuts I made are not really hammering the police department, which they are, because we're still solving cases. And that's the way I see it. I'm not happy with what he did with the police department. I'm certainly not happy that the detective division only has 50 people or so in it. I mean, I think that's a crime itself. I mean, you should be going up in detectives, not down in detectives.
How many they used to have?
When I was in the Bureau, we had 63 gold badge detectives, but I had 120 people in general working in investigations. Between wiretap investigations and homicide investigations and intelligence investigations. Listen, you can't cry or complain about the level of violence in the town if you're not giving the cops the resources to combat this. Now, I know that there's an initiative coming up where they're going to be going door to door. They've identified people who have a propensity to commit violent crime with guns, and they're simply going to go door to door and say, listen, we know who you are. We're asking you.
We've done this a lot.
Right. And it's going to come up again. But you need manpower, Paul, to do that. You can't do that with 50 people.
Okay, let me play devil's advocate because I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you, John.
Yeah, go ahead.
So, one, you have said before that it's not about having more cops, it's how you use them.
Right. And I'll explain that. Exactly. You're exactly right. I always said, and I will always contend, and I'll still contend, if we change what we expect from the service that we get from the New Haven Police Department, we could do this job efficiently with less police officers. That's an absolute. I still stand by that. I still agree with that. However, this community, our city, has not changed its expectations that what it wants from its police department. So, if you want that, it's going to be labor intensive. That's exactly what I've been saying to you.
You're talking about walking beats.
I'm talking about walking beats. I'm talking about door-to-door initiatives. I'm talking about all the things that we like here in New Haven that our cops do.
You do want the door-to-door initiatives, right?
I do want the door-to-door initiatives, but right when you flood with every other kind of initiative, you can't have all the initiatives. Is what I'm getting at, right?
What would you cut?
I certainly would. Well, I would put more detectives in the bureau, right? It's hard for me to say what I would cut because I don't have it right in front of me exactly what is going on there.
Right?
I wouldn't cut. I would cut all out 100% walking beats. Absolutely, there should be a motorized beat who is detailed to walk in the area.
And what about the argument that the mayor hears so much from the public? What are you doing about gun violence? So he wants to be there at a press conference to say, "Here's what we're doing about violence."
He should say, "How about let's organize a meeting and I'll let you talk to my chief of police because." Nobody knows better what the police department is doing about gun violence than the chief of police. The mayor doesn't know any better about what the police department is doing about gun violence. And the thing is, okay, he's going to talk about gun violence. Now, what happens when he starts to get questions about exactly what's going on? He doesn't have the frame of reference to speak about
But he's
policing.
there with the chief. The chief can answer, too.
Why does he have to be there? That's my point.
When you were there, did you have the mayor at most of your press conferences?
When I was there, I didn't have the mayor at most of my press conferences.
Just if there was a huge crime, like I remember
and then even
the
then,
family shot in Fairhaven. Yeah.
Even then, and I'm a nobody, and this guy, DeStefano's been there 20 years. He would even say, "What am I saying here? What's going on? What do you want me to do?" And then I could tell you directly more than once. He said, "You know what? I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to turn it over to you."
Velleca does that,
right? So,
but he's there more. Like
I like to hear from Carl, to be honest with you, because I think Carl makes sense when he talks.
The chief, well, he speaks at those. They both speak together. The question is, DeStefano wasn't usually at the press conferences. He was at the biggest ones, like Annie Lay or Billy White getting arrested, or the mass shooting in Fairhaven. He wasn't there.
He was at the arson, the triple arson,
but he wasn't
stuff like that.
Homicide arrest made. That wasn't.
Okay, here's what I'm trying to say. He certainly would never take a question on police initiatives of what we're doing at the grassroots level. Put it that way, right? He wouldn't comment about stuff like that.
We're talking to John Velleca, who you could tell why is our criminal justice expert, resident at WNHH FM on Dateline, New Haven. So, John, when I was reading through these warrants, I noticed that they challenge a view you and I have had. You had it more extreme than I did. But we were both very skeptical of this widespread use of video surveillance in the city. And sometimes everybody just has their own cameras. The police aren't even putting them up. So a lot of that is used in cases. And then we have body camera footage and then we also now have police cameras, video cameras placed throughout the city at hotspots, and they are being used as not the main evidence, but like everything from that Sherman and Whaley one in the morning, Michael Witt shooting, to some of the more recent cases, including Fairhaven. They show, and then Dwight Chapel, they're showing, Day Street Chapel, they're showing the actual act.
Right.
And they're showing the person fleeing the scene if they don't get the actual act. And that has been useful. They, because you were saying you don't think that ever helps solve the crime, or that we're giving up too much in response. And what the mayor said, privacy's over. Everyone's got these Ring cameras anyway.
Mm-hmm.
But, some people feel like we're becoming a society where everything's on camera, and that becomes a shortcut from doing investigative work. They are talking to people. Right. They are getting physical evidence. They are doing DNA, and they're getting quick. That's another tool you didn't have. They're getting quicker results from fingerprints and DNA. But should we re-examine? Surveillance video seems to be helping these cases.
No, I will stand corrected completely, 100%.
Really?
Absolutely.
Wait a second. Do we have a come to Jesus moment here? John Velleca, come to Jesus moment on Dateline New Haven?
Yeah, listen. Our goal...
preach, man. Let me know. Tell me what happened.
Our goal is to, put away, take out of the communities people who are committing bad acts, killing people and hurting people. And like I said before, these warrants need supportive evidence, because we can't just do it, on eyewitness identification. So if these cameras look as if they're corroborating a lot of events, they're lending supporting evidence,
they're giving leads. And so the license plate reader's been big. They
license plate readers are big.
Car. Yeah.
So listen, I'll be the first one. If that's what we're getting out of these things, I will stand corrected for sure. So
what about your concerns? Are those coming true?
I think, like I've always kind of said, if the trade-off is worth it, then the invasion is worth it, right? And I think that's the way you have to weigh everything when it comes to civil liberties. And I think that the trade-off looks to be worth it at this point.
So your biggest concern was that would be a shortcut for cops not doing their jobs right, correct? Relying on video and not...
To a degree, but it certainly doesn't look like that. It looks like the cops are still doing a pretty good job. But yes, that was one of the things I was worried about. And two was, I didn't think for the level of invasion it was going to yield the level of value. You follow? And it looks like it has done that too. So,
well, the mark of an intelligent person is willing to change their mind based on evidence.
Right. Well, that's
Okay, so you are officially today an intelligent person on Dateline New Haven.
Yeah,
John
exactly.
Velleca.
Thank you. When I leave, I won't be so much anymore.
Me either. But I don't know. I just looked through.
Well, I'm here. Right.
Body cam. So, body cameras at cops. At first, one of the critiques from people on my side of things was that's going to show you what the cop sees, but it doesn't show you the cop unless it's somebody else's body cam.
Right.
We've actually gotten some pretty damning cases of police misconduct from body cams and clearing cops who actually did fine because of body cams. We still have citizen video, and thanks to continual vigilance by New Haven, for the most part, New Haven police are no longer stealing our cameras and arresting us and destroying our video if we try to take video, but still happens sometimes. How are those working out? You have concerns about body cameras?
No, I don't. The only concern I would have about body cameras right now is the oops, I forgot to turn it on kind of stuff. But outside of that, I think that's great. I think we've gotten to the point now where the first thing when I watch something, the first thing I see is a body cam. And if there's a body cam, we get to see.
I mean, the Randy Cox case really, and it was also internal cameras that really helped.
Right, Randy Cox, but Tyree Nichols, that's a big job. That was a big job just to hear. Everything, just the banter back and forth between the officers and lending to their mindset was big. Not just the assault of Tyree Nichols, but what the officers are saying among each other. And, I think they've paid dividends. I think they're great.
Shafiq Abdul-Sabur says, great topic you both are discussing. Thank you, Shafiq Abdul-Sabur, retired police officer running for mayor. So what about this concern about the requirement that every officer and patrol car have body cameras working when they're on the job? It's a statewide law. And there was an article that you showed me, John, thank you, that says it's not being enforced in a lot of departments that turned off. We've had some incidents in other communities that turned off. I'm not hearing about that in New Haven. Does that mean it's not existing, or just we're not hearing about it?
No,
Is there a problem here?
All right, so this is going to be an expansive topic, but we're going to back up just a little bit. Why it's not happening here in New Haven is because
I'm asking if it's happening in New Haven.
I don't think it is, and I'm going to tell you why. So what we see when the police accountability bill came through. Everybody waved the flag about qualified immunity. The bill doesn't do anything at qualified immunity. Let's get that right there. It doesn't close the reins. Everything that existed for qualified immunity before still exists now. The reality of the situation is there is a culture within the upper echelon of policing, executive level and state's attorneys that is guarded. That's guarded very closely. And it's tradition and the status quo. They don't want change. Okay? So the reality is when the bill goes through, nobody was really worried about it. You know why? because there's nobody to check the compliance of this bill. Okay? Good. You want us to have body cameras? Fine. Who's going to come in and enforce that? Nobody. Nobody's going to enforce it. You know who's going to enforce that? Your own police department, right? So why do we not see it in New Haven? Because we got a chief who, if you ask me, is a newer chief who doesn't guard that culture, who's okay with pointing the finger at it and saying we need to do things better here. And that's why I think you see a lot of the good things coming out of New Haven PD. Other police departments, not so much. I mean, we're a couple of years in now. Not everybody has body cameras. Nobody has dash cameras. Not everybody is complying with the police accountability bill. And what are you going to do about it? That's my point. Nothing. You're not going to do it. Nobody's going to do anything about it because it's on the individual chief to do anything about it.
So the leadership sets the tone.
The leadership sets the tone, and the leadership, not just in our state, across the country, guards the culture of policing. The same type of policing. Listen, why do you think we policed black and brown communities the same way we policed them for 100 years? Nobody wants to change it. You're not going to tell me if you get a chief's job, you can't change it. You can change it. Believe me when I tell you, there are a lot of things that can be done where you can change the way you police certain communities, how you use certain equipment, certain initiatives out in the community. You can change all that. It's not being done because it's specifically not being done.
John Velleca, we touched this earlier, but there have been articles in the press in Connecticut and nationally about the staffing shortage of cops. It's continued. It did start. I hate to blame everything, pandemic and Black Lives Matter, but it started during that. And New Haven's still down a lot of officers, though. We have been recruiting, getting, classes a lot more New Haveners in them, a lot more people of color, a lot more women.
Right.
But we're still down a lot. You mentioned the shortage of detectives, although you're not so sure we need as big a force as people say.
Right.
Where does it stand now? You teach possible future cops at Albertus.
Yeah.
Where do we stand now in the challenge of finding enough cops, and what should we do about it, and is it real?
Well, yeah, it's very real. I can tell you that, the first day of class when you go around the room and you ask a bunch of criminal justice majors what they want to do, and nobody says municipal police officer, that's a problem. The only type of law enforcement you get are FBI. You get a lot of U.S. Marshals, a lot of kids now will say, but most of them will talk about going into the private sector in a security fashion or a cybersecurity or something to that degree. But, nobody says, I want to be a police officer. Nobody even says, I want to be a police detective. And that I could tell you that's here in Albertus, and that was in Springfield, Mass, when I taught in Springfield, Mass, and that's a big criminal justice school. And when that's a problem, when there's not a big draw into our profession anymore, which is a shame because it's a great profession.
Well, how do you try to inspire the young people in your classes?
I tell them just that, just like I said. I say, listen, I'm a little disheartened that nobody here wants to be a municipal police officer the way I was, a municipal police detective, which I thought was the best job in the world. And I think you should really consider that.
And why is that a great job?
Because a municipal
devil's advocate, I can see why it'd be interesting. Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting job for sure, but a municipal police detective there's nowhere to go when something major happens to you and your family, right? And this is not to diminish patrol officers, but patrol officer will take the case, write it, and then send it to the bureau. When you're a detective, that's it. You're it. You have to come up with some kind of resolution, closure for that family, some kind of justice for that family, and that's a heavy burden, all right? And that's a detective, not a detective manager the way I spent most of my career, but an actual detective, right? And there's something to be said for that when you could go home at night and that, listen, you can't bring a loved one back, but you did the next best thing. You brought somebody to justice, you tried to give a family closure, and you've been there through them throughout the most difficult time of their lives. And I really I can't see another job where you get that kind of satisfaction, to be my personal opinion, where you get that. And you don't get that from the FBI. The FBI is a great agency, but they're removed, right? They're removed from the actual grassroots to the community thing. This is where, I still see people now, I've been retired 10 years, that I met as a detective, working a case when they're like, oh, hey, look, how you doing? How you been? You make friends for life. And I think there's something to be said for that. I think it's a great job, to be honest.
So one big change in terms of how police do or don't respond has been Compass. They're happening all over the country where cities are setting up teams. This is one of the great outcomes of Black Lives Matter. Teams of social workers or psychologists or people who have lived experience living on the street or with addiction. They respond to cases that sometimes emergencies police otherwise would where they're there to diffuse a situation, find somebody, help, and not have it escalate, despite the best officer, into a more violent case or an arrest. How have you been viewing that, and how has your thinking evolved on that?
Well, I've always felt that there was a place for that. You know, like I said, back when I was there, the issue was with the clinicians and injecting them into a dangerous situation, right? But I think that if they're proactively, they're out there and they're working in situations that have yet to become dangerous and trying to thwart that, I think that's a great initiative. I mean, how can anybody be against that, to be honest with you?
In New York City, the street team there was working with the young Michael Jackson impersonator who was just killed on the subway when he was having an episode.
Yeah.
And the former Marine stood up, put him in chokehold, and killed him. That's really raising a lot of issues and concerns in New York. How did you see that incident?
To be honest with you, Paul, I didn't read it. I saw the headline, I didn't read the article.
So this guy had been homeless. He had mental illness problems, and the street team had repeatedly found him and got him into places, and he left it as substance abuse problems. And he was a Michael Jackson performer on the street, and his mother had been murdered by her boyfriend. And then he was on the subway acting, saying, "I don't care, I'm just going to die." But it wasn't clear. People catching video. It wasn't clear he actually attacked anybody. But he had recently, though people didn't know that. And a guy who was riding, who was recently in the Marines, he gave him a chokehold, but then didn't let up on the windpipe after 8 seconds, and the guy died. Okay. And they're not sure if they're going to charge him, because in New Haven, people are scared about what's happening in the subways. They don't know what to do with, although they do have these street outreach teams. You have a mayor who both said, "I'm going to be pro-police and quality of life, but I'm also going to be upping how I help people get alternatives to incarceration or arrest for their mental health problems," which is a big challenge in New York. And there's a big debate now in New York about whether to charge the guy who choked him was it self-defense or not. That's
a tough one. I'll be honest with you.
They said there was no evidence that there was a threat to anyone's life.
Yeah, so I mean, who's saying that? Is the police saying that? If the police are saying that, then you have to charge them.
But there's no decision yet. It's fraud. Right. It's like the Bernie Getz.
I'm gonna have to look at that when we're done. There's a video, and there's no threat to the.
Well, we don't know. People felt threatened. He didn't threaten to hurt them.
Any overt threat.
Right. You know. He's having an episode, and it's a little murky.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, I mean, I think that's
well, there's outrage among the advocates saying now if someone is acting out and you're not feeling comfortable,
you just choke him out. I mean, I think that might be something the courts need to. I think he needs to be charged, and maybe the courts need to sort that out. You know, through a verdict of innocence or guilt.
Another thing that happened when you were in charge of the police department was the homeless encampments.
We had Occupy, and we had
basically now in New Haven, like Phoenix, like Oakland, like all sorts of cities around the country.
Yeah,
we had a homeless camp that's not as big. How would you have dealt with that?
That's it. You know, the homeless encampments are a little difficult because, and I always felt my officers did a great job going there very respectfully, understanding, putting themselves, being empathetic. But there also gets to a point where, like, maybe if you have, 100 or so people there's that group of 5 people who come in and use drugs and
most people use drugs, and then the issues about flammable tents.
You use drugs to the point where it's a problem, let's say, right? Mm-hmm. Or just their behavior is problematic, and it kind of ruins it for everybody, so to speak. I hate to say it like that, but when they escalate their acts and it starts to be unacceptable, that's when the whole initiative gets questioned, and that's the problem. And I think Occupy was really good till the end.
Or the middle, when it started becoming a real public health hazard.
Right, it became,
the public couldn't use that half of the green.
And that was those were all people from outside of our city, too, that came in and kind of screwed everything all up, right? But in the initial stages, everything was, listen, here's what we're doing, and here's why we're doing it, and this is it. We want you to respect us. And the cops were really good about it.
They were. The cops didn't want to be. But what happens, like, at a certain point, who owns public space?
Right, that's the point. That's the point. Yeah, I don't know. I think that when you get to the point, if who owns public space and it's not being treated the right way, and you're using drugs, you're defecating out in the open, and you're ruining things, and there's a substantial health problem there, with the safety hazard and the flammable tents, then we have to. We would be remiss if we didn't take action at that point.
John Velleca, I love chatting with you on Dateline New Haven. I learned so much. So before I let you go, what advice do you have for the mayoral candidates? What should they be doing and saying about criminal justice?
I think Shafiq does a good job when he speaks about criminal justice.
Right? One of the candidates.
I'd be honest with you, I don't see a lot of the other candidates Mayor Elliker.
Well, there's
I'm
one
sorry.
candidate says we should be trying not to make arrests for drugs.
Yeah, that's
and
ridiculous.
guns if we can.
And that stuff I don't even listen to because that doesn't make any sense at all. Anyways, I think Elliker is good. But I think the police department's carrying him. I think the police department is doing a fantastic job, and I think Elliker is benefiting from that.
Was that his first choice for the leadership of the department?
No, as we all know, it was not. But I think Shafiq has got some pretty good innovative ideas, to my personal opinion. I think that Shafiq has what we would say a vision, right? And I don't see a vision for Mayor Elliker with regard to public safety. I really don't.
Well, I do see a vision of John Velleca in the studio as our resident criminal justice expert. Thank you so much for making time for us, John.
Oh, anytime.
Love having you on.
I love coming in.
Love putting it in the Independent. And thanks to Nora Grace Flood filling in for the incomparable station manager, Harry Droz.
The irreplaceable.
Irreplaceable, but
Harry
she's doing
Droz.
a good job in his stead. And thanks for joining us, John Velleca. And we're going to take it out with the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long at WNHH New Haven's home for community radio.